I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is JJ Vance. Be sure and check out my films. Doors of Perception is now available free on Relay, which is a brand new streaming service. You can also get it on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku, Apple, and a few more. We are booking guests for March. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Be sure to check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It is the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where we feature some of your favorite podcasts and content creators. Today I want to welcome JJ Vance. He is not the vice president, but host of the Operation GCD podcast, which blends comedy and conspiracy and explores topics like true crime, Satanism, secret societies, and other taboo topics. JJ, welcome. How you doing?
Chris, greetings, sir. Great to be here. Appreciate the invite. JJ Vance, not the vice president. Part-time vampire hunter.
Right on, man. It's great to have you on. I love what you're doing. You've done some great deep dives into several topics. You also provide essential levity alongside the information you're presenting. You've also had an interesting journey with the U.S. Air Force, which made you aware of some of the conspiratorial information you cover now. Today, we're going to share your research into the Smiley face killings, and if time allows, you've done some deep dives into the Satanic Panic era. We'll see where the discussion takes us. Before we do, this is your first time on. Let the audience know a little bit about yourself and how to find out more.
Yes, sir. Like I said, Chris, appreciate the invite. Looking forward to the conversation. I've actually tuned into your show many times in the past, so I definitely appreciate your work and coverage. You've done a lot of topics of high weirdness and conspiracy theories. But yeah, JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD. That is Garbage Can Dude. That's me. And I actually started this podcast of Operation GCD in May of 2016. So it's been a bit of a journey, and obviously I've adapted kind of over time and, altered some of the aspects of it. But, I do aim to educate and entertain, sir. So I appreciate your commentary and the levity that I do offer in my, my program.
Awesome, man. Tell us a little bit about your journey of awareness, starting with some of the things you discovered in the Air Force.
Oh, for sure. I'd be happy to. So I served 21 years in the United States Air Force Military Police. It's a bit of, I jokingly say I was the poster child, but I mean, I literally have posters where I'm on the cover of magazines and everything. So, I mean, it's both figurative and literal. So, I was introduced to a lot of aspects. How I got here today is very much rooted in that same storyline because, we're told how the world operates. We're told this, that, and X, Y, and Z. And, but I'm sure as you've noticed over time, it ain't necessarily how things go around here. And over time, I got introduced to a lot of aspects of my Air Force career that I was like, wait a second, really? And really made me question a lot of things of how, the world operates. And I'll say, I got a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, and I didn't like it.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what you did witness that brought you to those conclusions?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll share you a brief anecdotal story of one of those incidents early on in my young career. So I joined at 17. I was very much a child. I don't have any problem saying that I was a fucking child with a gun in my hand running around the world. So I was 17 when I went to, basic training in the Air Force Police Academy. I was almost 18 by the time I got to my assignment. Or no, I just turned 18 by the time I got to my first assignment in Great Falls, Montana in 1999. And strangely enough, if I just one quick, tangent, the world operates in strange ways we don't quite understand. We all take educated guesses, and I think you do that, I do that, and many others do. And it's just we live in a strange world because I went to Great Falls, Montana for my first assignment 27 years ago. My first assignment in the Air Force. I left there 24 years ago, and I recently, just the other day, got hired to manage a bison ranch there. So 24 years ago, if you told me I was coming back there, I'd have laughed in your face.
Yeah.
But that's how the world, that's kind of how the universe operates, I guess. So I found myself on my first, I deployed 5 times, combat veteran, five times ever. Well, 4 times ever technically, because my first deployment was it was in December of 2000 through May of 2001. So pre-September 11th. I was stationed at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And at the time, Osama bin Laden was in the news, even though it was before September 11th. This is even before Bill Cooper's infamous Hour of the Time radio program in June of 2001, where he warned everybody, your government is going to do a domestic terror event and blame it on Osama bin Laden. He did that 3 months prior to 9/11. Alex Jones runs around telling everybody he did that today, but that was actually Bill Cooper that did that. And Bill Cooper hated Alex Jones. He just listened to the Hour of the Time. And so I'm aware of bin Laden. We had the whole Yemeni incident. We had the Dar es Salaam embassy bombings in Africa, et cetera, right? That was blamed on it. This is what got Osama bin Laden as the #1 most wanted man on the FBI most wanted list prior to September 11th, 2001. As a result of that, I was aware of the name. I was aware of those circumstances. And I'm stationed at a base where every building on the base in Prince Sultan Air Base was built by the bin Laden group. Wow. So as a young airman, I'm asking a lot of questions of my officers and ranking NCOs, and they're all just like, kid, go shut up on color. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, because I'm saying, like, how is it the family of the #1 most wanted man on the FBI's list is literally built all of our buildings here, bud? Yeah. It seems like it seemed like a legitimate question. I didn't get legitimate. I was concerned. I was a security military police guy. I was concerned. That was my duty. And I got a lot of go shut up and cut. I'm like, that don't seem like the right response, guys.
Right.
But I wasn't in any position, wasn't in any position really. You take a lot of orders. So if you don't take orders, they got away with dealing with dissenters. But you're giving away a lot of freedoms and liberties by joining the military. It's very similar to prison in many respects.
Yeah.
So while assigned there on that base, after these incidents are going on, and I come back into we had a decent base. We had an in-ground pool. We had a Burger King. So I'd lived in a tent on other assignments. Yeah. You know what I mean, in the Middle East. But this one, was fairly well established, fairly well fortified. Pardon me. And I come back in. We have like these little buildings, like four like dorm room style rooms, like a day room and like a bathroom and stuff. Like those were our quarters, right? So two of the dudes in my building with the 4 rooms, they work day shift, and the rest of us work night shift. So I'm coming in one morning from work, and 2 of the dudes that work day shift are in the day room watching TV, like CNN, right? And they're like, hey man, you just got off shift. CNN saying that we bombed people last night. I'm like, but I was on that flight line all night last night. Not a damn plane moved. But here I'm watching on CNN, they're talking about planes in Saudi Arabia. We are the only base for the planes in Saudi Arabia at the time, bombing stuff. I'm like, dude, not a plane moved on that flight line all night last night. So yeah, I quickly realized the shit you see on the news ain't real.
How do you feel about the state of society? What is unfolding with the left-right division? How far we've come since 2020, the awareness of people. It seems like people were starting to become aware of the corruption, check out of it, and then a couple of years ago, the new round of high-impact events and propaganda comes through, and now we seem more divided than ever. At least they'd like to portray that we are. It's difficult to discern what's real nowadays, but how do you feel about everything?
Well, you're spot on. I agree with your assessment there. I think a lot of folks started noticing too much. So you had to ramp up PSYOP season and all those nonsense. I see a lot of the hallmarks of a color revolution being played out here in America today, funded and financed by the same folks who've done it in other nations. And I'm not just talking about intelligence agencies. I'm talking about the Rothschild enterprise known as George Soros. He's exclusively financed by the Rothschilds that started Soros management funds. And all this stuff in Minneapolis is route, just completely, just it's just rotten. It's all rot with Soros related called revolution activities. So we see that with the George Floyd stuff in the summer of love 2020. Our Lord and Savior St. George Floyd, and his RIP, because that's the way it was treated, right? They even put him in the halls of Congress, right? We could go all day on that business, but the hallmarks of those things that we're seeing still play out in Minneapolis today is reeks of the rot of the Soros enterprises financed by the Rothschilds.
If you look at the Charlie Kirk, that's the exact opposite energy of the George Floyd, but seemingly accomplishes the same level of division.
Sure, point and counterpoint, right? You got to have both sides of the spectrum. Play one against the other. Otherwise, it takes two to tango. Otherwise, you just got some asshole out there dancing around by himself.
As far as today's topic, what brought you to look into the Smiley face killings?
Oh, this has actually been a great interest of mine since April of 2008, largely because I fit the victimhood. So I'm stationed at Randolph Air Force Base in April of 2008. This is the initial introduction of this theory on PR campaign by the original detectives and college professor out of St. Cloud, Minnesota. You have retired NYPD homicide detective Kevin Gannon and his associate Professor Gilbertson out of St. Cloud State, criminology professor, actually former Army intel though, by the way. So he knows a thing or two about how some of these let's call them Phoenix program, come home, program to kill style David McGowan theories go in that respect. Mm-hmm. I mean, he may not have the ins and outs of it, but he understands the framework of intel operations, right? Right. And he doesn't. They've never blatantly called it that, but over time, that's kind of what I painted it out as. This is a very similar Phoenix program, come home, Operation Chaos style events where they're committing ritual human sacrifices in occult nature. That is the nature of the Smiley face killings. Young men are being stalked, murdered, and left, presumably drowned is the appearance of the crime. However, the actual forensics and the science of it do not comport with the drowning conclusions. So, not to mention, a lot of times they are found with high volumes of alcohol, but also GHB. And if you don't test for GHB, which most coroners and medical examiners do not, unless it's uniquely requested, then they'll never detect it. Now, Kevin Gannon and Gilbertson have gone to these families and paid for second autopsies for these families, even had now deceased RIP. There are certain men I do respect the man's work. Cyril Wecht. Unlike my comment on George Floyd's RIP, Cyril Wecht was a great man. He was an attorney and a pathologist. You don't see that very often. Someone has a law degree and a medical license degree. But he is an infamous pathologist who determined the numerous cases of these smiley face killer victims were indeed homicide. I can give you some examples of that later. But April of 2008, I'm stationed at Randolph Air Force Base. At the military police headquarters unit there for that command. I come out of my hole in the basement for 5 minutes to get some air. And I see that we had a TV in the little kind of waiting area up in the main office. And I see on there, Fox News, we have Kevin Gannon Gilbertson on, I believe it was Glenn Beck's show at the time, describing these circumstances. And they have like the victimology, right, of these young men. And it's like, age 18 to 25, highly intelligent, highly skilled, highly athletic. I'm like, what the fuck? They're going. These victims are going out drinking and then being victimized. I'm like, I'm at a bar every night, bud. I better pay attention to this, right? Yeah. So that's kind of where I started, and I've obviously gone down that path over the last whatever this is, almost 20 years, right? 18 years.
This is a case I haven't studied much. When were the first killings, or at least when do they believe the first killing started?
Well, the initial victim zero is often described as Patrick McNeil on New Year's of '98. Disregard February 98. Again, I think it's February 98. Then the New Year's of '99 with the second victim. Both in New York City. Both disappeared out of Manhattan bars. Both demonstrably homicide, but given the forensic science of the victims' bodies. But they were dumped in the East River, and they both were found in the same location. So you have an individual disappearing from Midtown. You have an individual disappearing from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, 7-8 miles by river to this point called Al's Point in Brooklyn, New York. And the detective even went as far as testing the stream patterns of the river. Could something ever float over there? And they determined it's impossible. So on top of the forensics of the body, the logistics of how it got there was ruled out as not being possible. So those were kind of the initial referred to as victim zero. I'm open to other victims being before that. However, there's limiting factors. So there's a lack of, if you don't have the second autopsy, you can't get a second autopsy for a victim that died in 94. I do suspect there was a victim in 94 in New York City. I actually suspect the very first victim was in New York City, and it's often described, it was in the book by Maury Terry, The Ultimate Evil, and we'll get into how this is a satanic cult that's committing these crimes. But there's an infamous case of The Ultimate Evil called the Death Mask case with an art dealer stalking, abducting a young man from a bar there and leaving him for dead in a very similar capacity. That one was not dumped in a river. I think that was the evolution of the mode of operations, the modus operandi here. But that strangely enough, when I say there's an ongoing cover-up of these matters, the new edition of The Ultimate Evil, which was I would argue was finagled away from Maury Terry by the director Josh Zeman, the guy who did the Son of Sam documentary on Netflix, amongst other projects. He removed he got the rights to the book to republish it and removed the death mask chapter completely. Oh. So that should be tough.
What was the reported cause of death, at least for the first victims?
Drowning. Got too drunk, went to go piss in the river, and fell in and drowned. That's almost always the conclusion by local law enforcement.
What other evidence was there that there was something else that occurred before the drowning?
So with Patrick McNeil, victim zero, great question, sir. I don't want to get too gross, but if you die on land versus if you die on water, there are some distinct differences in the forensic data that's available in the analysis of that body. In the case of Patrick McNeil, he had fly larvae that had nested in his groin area. And not only is that impossible to do in water, it's impossible to do when he's face down in water in 40 degrees. So that indicated he died on land. And now he'd been missing for 40 some days. And it also was the New York City Police Department refused to release the information to the family, the autopsy, et cetera, for Patrick McNeil for almost 12 years. They had to sue for it.
Wow.
And when they finally got it, this idea that he got their loved one got drunk and went and pissed in the river and fell in was preposterous because he'd been burnt, tortured, tied down, and cut. And this is on and above the fly larva that had later nested in his deceased body on land. He had cigarette burn marks on his arm and ligature marks on his wrists and ankles. And this is an ongoing thing where law enforcement hides these details from public purview, but time and time again, when that information is finally able to be achieved, if possibly, right? Because not always it's able to be achieved, even from the families. Even some of the families are still restricted, right? Yeah. So, but when the cases we do have that information, it's without fail. Here's another example. March of 2017, Dakota James, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Cyril Wecht actually reviewed this before his death and determined it was, in fact, homicide. Everything I just said with Patrick McNeil in 98 applies to, in New York City, applies to Dakota James in March of 2017. He was burnt, tied down, cut, and held for a period of approximately 42 days.
How many cases can we look at that are possibly linked to this same group?
Conservative estimate, 300.
Wow. And these are all across the United States, different locations?
Yes, sir. What we do see is different cells operating almost in a terrorist format, if you will, domestic terrorists. And, we see incidents right now. The hot spots are Austin and Chicago predominantly.
How far apart do these cases seemingly go?
From victim to victim. Now, I have some ideas on that. Actually, Detective Gilbertson and Gannon, I think, have a much more inside track on all that. They said, respect to them, they said a lot of information I wouldn't share either. But they seem to have a better understanding. They've actually gone to numerous congressmen by their own admissions and interview. I've never personally communicated with these individuals, but by their own admission and interviews, they've gone to congressmen, the FBI, the Secret Service, et cetera, and actually told them in advance there's going to be a murder victim of this cult in this city, and they've been correct more than once.
Earlier you had mentioned something about one of the autopsies showed that there is more to the story. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I'll give you an example with Dakota James and Cyril Weck, because folks can go check out Cyril Weck's own analysis of that crime on the Oxygen Channel's Smiley Face Killer Victim show from back in 2019. Now, so you can actually see Cyril Weck describing these details in a report to the detectives and Dakota James's mother. And again, so Dakota James goes missing. He's gone for 40 days. He's found in the Monongahela or the Allegheny. I forget which one goes kind of on the northwest side of Pittsburgh. But he's found in a spot where literally law enforcement is on video camera on the news hours before searching. So that's another commonality. They dump him back in the same place they either disappeared from or where law enforcement was just searching. It causes greater chaos. Think of it in Operation Chaos style fashion, right? This is the manner in which to create the most chaos, even for law enforcement, even creating the chaos internally to the investigation. That is a key factor in the crime.
Is there any evidence that there may be a cover-up with the police force involved in this?
Excellent question, sir. I like where your brain was at. Yeah, for sure. So in that same case with Dakota James, so Dakota James's mother then takes Cyril Weck's autopsy, pathology, medical exam report of her son's murder, right? Once she finally got all the details and was able to hand that file over to him, and he did it, and points out the ligature marks, points out the burn marks that the authorities just ignored, right? Again, he'd been missing for 40 days. He had decomposition of less than 12 hours. He'd been missing for 40 days. Wow. And you may be thinking, oh, they had him on ice. No, there'd be signs of that, and there wasn't. So she takes that report proving her son was murdered, takes it to the Allegheny District Attorney's Office, Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. This is the same county Cyril Weck was the medical examiner in for 32 years. So it's not like he doesn't have credibility in that fucking county, right?
Yeah.
She takes it to that office, and I say the credibility that he has because the Allegheny prosecutor knew that. He had the FBI and Secret Service in that meeting for some reason.
Wow.
I argue it's matters of national security. I don't know who's, these nebulous terms of national security, because that falls right in this line of this Phoenix program combined nonsense.
For those that aren't familiar with the Phoenix program, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I highly recommend folks check out Program to Kill by Dave McGowan. He rightfully asserts that the Bill Colby, CIA Director Bill Colby, Chief Satanist Michael Aquino, who was a major figure in the psychological operations of that program in Vietnam, brought these psychological warfare tactics of terrorizing the domestic population of a nation, weaponizing their religion and folklore against them, and then murking folks in a very gruesome fashion in which to create the most audacious murder scene possible to scare the shit out of people. And now that's what I'm saying is going on with these smiley face killer victims and murders. Now they are going on. There's an occult aspect and factor to all that as well. And there was occult stuff associated with the Phoenix program, but just on its face, an example of what I'm saying of the Phoenix program. So they would murk local folks in villages across Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam that were a problem for the Western enterprises that were over there. And when I say Western enterprises, a lot of that stuff, in my opinion, was about rubber and tires and French corporations and American corporations. That's where they were getting all of their. Suddenly they were cut off from the source of which they were making all of these tires and stuff for, right? That, it was one of the precipitating events in the Vietnam War. But these are some of the corporate interests I'm discussing and what they're employing to, local folks that were impeding on these efforts, right? Not just the war effort, but these corporate moneyed interests effort, right? Locally in these areas of the Vietnam War. They were taking these local folks, murking them in the middle of the night, putting they had a little tool. They would just poke them in the neck with a little tool, would put 2 puncture marks to make it look like a vampire, because the local folklore had a vampiric creature that would float around the jungles at night, and so they were very scared of this kind of folklore, right? So they weaponized that folklore to convince the local folks that these people that were speaking out against the U.S. and Western forces were dying by the vampire.
Wow.
That was actually adapted by Edward Lansdale, Michael Aquino, for example. I do an Anatomy of the Satanic Panic series on my Operation GCD live Thursday show, where I've been unpacking a lot of these matters of the Satanic Panic and the actual murders and crimes and satanic ritual abuse of children, the real stuff that went on, and unpacking the propaganda to distract everybody away from it. And Michael Aquino is a key figure in all that, Church of Satan, Temple of Set. But he directly reported to Bill Colby and Edward Lansdale at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon in Vietnam for the Phoenix program by numerous accounts. So it's not, I'm not just saying that without evidence. This is where he learned his tactics, was from Lansdale. So Lansdale actually started that vampire effort, scaring the shit out of local villagers in the Philippines in the 50s. So this shit, I mean, it's an old game. It's an old game that's, why change it if it's useful, right?
Let's talk about how we can link this to the smiley face killings and possibly occult rituals.
Sure. Well, on its face, so over time, I started visiting a lot of these smiley face killer victim sites to get a better understanding of this phenomenon that was going on. I certainly felt I could be a victim too. And I'm warning many of my friends and family that also could be victimized to these same regards, because the initial victimology was largely white males. Now, I argue that that's largely dependent upon the demographic of these different cities, whereas Boston seemingly has more Asian victims, and Chicago has more Indian victims, right? So it's somewhat based on the demographics and the availability of your victims, right, in that city, which only seems reasonable, but it's a misconception. People think it's always white folks, and there's African American males. It has grown. The phenomenon has evolved, but I found myself, I've always had a great interest in the ancient architecture of America, the mounds. I found myself visiting mound sites and smiley face killer victim sites in different cities across America, and I was like, wait a second, I got to reevaluate the situation when they're the same place, right? So, and then I started looking into the occult aspects of these mounds, and the OTO, Aleister Crowley, they love themselves some mounds. And the various offshoots of the OTO, which, Golden Dawn, you can go, there's a lot of thelemic organizations. Scientology is a corporate Satanist offshoot of that theology. Then you have the Process Church of the Final Judgment, Charles Manson and gang, which is a offshoot of Scientology. So we see the hierarchy, the umbrella network that produces these other subset cults, but they share a similar theology, and they seem to venerate these mounds.
So what is it about the mounds that you think is connected with these killings?
I think there's different mounds and different purposes, but generally speaking, many of these mounds were the sites of ancient human sacrifice.
Interesting.
So the smiley face killer victims are just simply a modern day human sacrifice, right? In the same sites as ancient human sacrifice.
I've had many guests that speculate that these structures predated any Native American civilizations. They may have had somewhat advanced civilizations, but I have not yet heard of the human sacrifice aspect. How did you connect that?
Yeah, I was just looking more into these mounds. So America was started on mounds. The secret society that started America, the Society of Cincinnati, George Washington and all of his officers, they love these mounds. The reason why we have maps of these mounds is because these men went out and mapped these mounds as their first order of business in America. Folks like Zebulon Pike, folks like Lewis and Clark. These are the earliest records in our national archives. So here's a great example of answer your question, Chris. In the epicenter of all that stuff, I'll bring it in with one smiley face killer victim, and it speaks to the cover up. It speaks to the cover up. Mac Kruzicki, he's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He went to high school on a mound in Arrowhead High School. He dies, I think it's December of 2006. His high school varsity wrestling teammate, Jared Dion, is one of the victims in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a major mound city. The reason we have all those mound maps is because Lieutenant Zebulon Pike of the Society of Cincinnati drew them in 1803. And so we know exactly where all the mounds are in La Crosse, and given the 12 victims in La Crosse, one victim survived. All 12 of them are on mound sites. So it's without fail. And at least in the early onset, right? It's without fail.
What else can go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, so Jared Dion and Mac Kruzicki die 18 months apart, 300 miles apart, 300 miles from their hometown, right? One's 300 miles west, 200 miles west, 200 miles south. Mac Kruzicki is last seen on Sinsinawa Avenue. He's found at the epicenter of Sinsinawa River and the Mississippi River at the confluence. Now, most mound sites are at confluences of rivers where the two rivers meet, right? And if you follow that, the name Sinsinawa refers to, well, there's disputes on it, but that Sinsinawa River runs up to Wisconsin from Iowa, and it's ends at a place called Sinsinawa Mound, Rattlesnake Mound. Now, Rattlesnake Mound, aka Sinsinawa Mound, in our largest mound complex left in America, which is Cahokia, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis in Illinois, though, on the Illinois side, East St. Louis, Illinois. That Rattlesnake Mound has actually, that Sinsinawa Mound there has been excavated over time. Archaeologists, anthropologists have studied it. They determined that mound was the burial site of human sacrifices. And it wasn't from men. It wasn't from men external to the culture. It was men from that culture. They were ritual human sacrificing folks from that culture in that mound. So we find that Sinsinawa connection. At the site of a murder of Todd Geib in circa March 2005 in rural Michigan, nowhere 40 miles from anything. He dies in his hometown, in his rural hometown, at a field party, right? And scrawled across the victim site there was the word Sinsinawa, spray paint. Huh. It was actually not at his site. It was relative to a neighboring site in Lansing, but it was attributed to the same cult group out of that area, right? So we see the connectivity of those things, right? And you think that somebody in Matt Krasicki's place back there in East Dubuque, Illinois, they're on Sinsinawa Avenue and Sinsinawa River, that victim, you'd figure somebody like his family could get some actual scrutiny into this matter, because his father was the U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, and his stepmother worked, I believe, for the ATF. Huh. So we're talking about high-level federal law enforcement, and they couldn't even investigate. No, they couldn't get investigations into their own son's murder. That should speak to some of the cover-up.
Have all the bodies been found in or near bodies of water?
I would say almost exclusively. I can't think of an incident where it wasn't found in water, because it causes chaos to the investigation. Law enforcement is happy to just call that person. I'm not saying all law enforcement parties are compromised or involved. They're happy to just say, "Oh, that's a drunk kid who fell in the water."
Yeah.
They don't want to cause an alarm in the local community. They want to make sure it's the scene from Jaws. It's the mayor from Jaws. It's safe to go in the water.
Every single victim was male, right?
There are instances where there's been a few, again, and given the evolution of the crimes, given the different cell networks, each cell kind of has each city has a little bit slightly different mode of operations, slightly different victimology. There are some women that may have fallen victim to this in recent years.
How else can we connect this to some kind of satanic cult?
The symbols they use. So the smiley face, the term smiley face killer was adapted by the mainstream media. In fact, the Detective Gannon and Professor Gilbertson said, well, that's the only one symbol out of approximately 13 symbols we've identified that this cult uses to communicate and mark their territories, right? I've been to some of these sites. I've seen some of those other symbols, and those men won't share their symbols. I won't either, just for the sake of their investigation and for mine. But I'll share this one. A swastika is very, very prominent throughout many of these sites. Oh, yeah. And swastika, like the Process Church of the Final Judgment's logo.
Right.
The satanic organization that I just described was an offshoot of Scientology, and that's an offshoot of the OTO Agape Lodge in Pasadena, California, of Jack Parsons. And maintains a strong influence today. And I would say these neo-Satanist groups are an offshoot of them, stuff like the 764 and the 098.
Have you done any dives into possible links with astrological signs and moon phases or any other type of ritualistic aspects?
I have, and there are. It's not exclusive, and it's not the exception, but I'm also not going to call it the rule yet either. But there's some there.
Right on. So,
to be fair, I'm not an occultist. I've been learning. So when I say there's some there, I have a rudimentary understanding of a lot of these occult practices and principles, and I'm learning over time, over these last 18 years. You could have asked me 10 years ago, and I wouldn't have told you anything about Satanism or occult relative to these crimes. But that's where I'm at today.
What other evidence can we look at that this may be connected to high-level groups?
So October 31st, 2001, Christopher Jenkins on Halloween. Halloween's a major incident of these crimes. He goes into a bar and falls victim to the standard victimhood stat and mode of operation we've discussed here. He's then later found, I think it's 21 days later, in the river there in Minneapolis. and his maternal uncle was not a special agent in charge of a office of the FBI, a regional director of the FBI. And that man was finally able to get his nephew's murder declared a homicide, along with his sister, the Christopher Jenkins' mother. However, I assure you, Minneapolis PD is not actively investigating that crime today.
Wow.
And that should tell you something, right? So they're gonna fight tooth and nail to an FBI regional director and his sister to declare a victim from accidental drowning, which was immediately declared and provided no scrutiny on, to a homicide, and then they're not going to do anything with it. Oh, well, that's telling enough to me right there.
Any theories on the purpose of these killings, as in anything high level occult? There seems to be multiple reasons, multiple layers for operations, but any thoughts on that?
No, that's a great question, Chris. So, when I retired from the U.S. Air Force in February 2019, I spent the last 7 years in the reserves. I did 13 active, 7 in reserves. So I started my PI agency while I was in the reserves. But when I was shortly after I officially retired in 2019, I got a phone call from a convicted kid diddler in Ohio. He called my business line. He was very adamant about doing it. I finally called him back. I took the information. He's telling me that he knows how this cult operates. I fucking found out I was investigating it, right? But I didn't get into that. He told me he knows how this cult operates. They recruit largely from within the prison system, largely from compromised individuals such as kid dealers. So you're telling me you're a cult member himself? He's like, no, I would never do those things. I didn't believe the guy. I'm just saying that this is the information that was conveyed to me, and I do find some of it to be valid.
When was... No, go ahead.
Oh, but to speak to, there's the occult there's the esoteric and the exoteric aspects of these crimes. The exoteric is the Operation Chaos Phoenix program come home style angle of scaring the shit out of the population by weaponizing the folklores and religions against them, right? And making a gruesome body discovery scene. I mean, the town of La Crosse, Wisconsin had 9 victims in 6 years. They were so freaked out, the entire town convened a meeting. Law enforcement and the politicians came to that meeting and said, there's nothing to see here, folks, right?
When was the most recent killing?
This week. There's been victims in Chicago, Michigan, Texas.
Really? This seems to be a more frequent event than portrayed in the media.
It's been growing exponentially in occurrences and the widespread nature of it. Yes, sir.
Earlier you mentioned serial killers. I'd like to dive into this a bit. This is another thing that I believe has intelligence behind it, theatrics. Like you were saying with the psych warfare, they use these operations to play in our fear to achieve certain agendas that are in the background. How many of our major serial killers do you think were, in a sense, manufactured?
All of them. So I recently published one of my Patreon shows for everyone to check out on my YouTubes. It's the case of Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you probably never heard of. This is, in my opinion, and well documented, and I argue, the most heinous serial killer we've ever seen. If you think of Henry Lee Lucas's Hand of Death cult claims, this would be the man that would serve as the general of that Hand of Death cult. He was friends with Charles Manson since 1952. He was very likely the man behind the mask at Lake Berryessa on September 27th, 1969, the Zodiac killing murder there, because the man in the mask gave all the details of Edward Wayne Edwards' life, first and foremost. So he escaped from Deer Lodge Prison, murdered a prison guard, escaped to Mexico. Ed Edwards did all of these things when he became the #1 most wanted man in America from November of 1958 to January of 1960.
Right on.
So, and to speak into the high-level nature of the intelligence operations here, Bill Colby, the man that Dave McGowan asserts and programmed to kill, that brought the Phoenix program home, and I agree, I assert his biological son is Ted Theodore Bundy. I call it Ted Bundy. So let me back up that claim for you. So Ted Bundy's born to an unwed mother's hospital in Burlington, Vermont, my bootleg hometown. I'm a New Englander. I grew up all my summers in Burlington, just outside of there, actually. My grandfather's from Burlington. He's born in that unwed mother's home. Bill Colby's from Burlington, Vermont. Moved there as a sophomore in high school because his father retired from the U.S. Army as a colonel and became the head of the ROTC program at the University of Vermont in Burlington. Bill Colby comes home from Operation Overcast, which would later become Project Paperclip, importing all those Nazis. He returns back in November of 1946. He, by his own admission, goes home to his parents' house from November of 46 to January of 47 when he enrolls in Columbia Law School. This is the precise time period of the procreation of Ted Bundy. And lo and behold, Ted Bundy's born 9.5 months later there in November at an unwed mother's home. His biological father is unknown. However, he looks identical to Bill Colby. And then you start looking at the population. In a city of 25,000 people, let's say 12,500 of them are men, just to be fair, on conservative estimates. Let's add to that, half of those men are of an age group in which, 18 to 25 or so, an age group you would presume Ted Bundy's mother would be having sexual relations with. Now we're talking less than 6,000 men, So out of those 6,000 men, how many of them look just like, Ted's dad? Well, I tell you, Bill Colby was there. He looks just like Ted Bundy, or Ted Bundy looks just like him.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Wouldn't that be weird? The man that brought him home is perhaps one of the most prolific individuals in this enterprise is his biological son. It would also provide context to Ted Bundy's law career, his meteoric rise in politics. He was the Washington State, one of their delegates to the 1968 RNC convention for Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. In 1970, he was the assistant and the driver to the RNC's gubernatorial candidate for Washington State.
Shit.
So this would give context to the meteoric rise he had in politics as a young man as well.
Would you say most of these serial killers have family connections with high-level military or intelligence?
I would. I think that's oftentimes how they get recruited. To be full disclosure, and I have no connections to these kind of higher level regards, but I'm saying if you have the proper blood in your system, this is how you get recruited. Charles Manson and I are both Maynard McCoys from Pikeville, Kentucky. My Vances are from Logan County. Pikeville is right across the river. That's where my grandmother Vance is from. She's a double Maynard McCoy. McCoys is in the Hatfield of McCoys. Now, the Hatfields are Vances, so I'm actually a Hatfield and a McCoy.
As far as Charles Manson, how much do you think he was actually involved with the murders, involved with the CIA? What were the real circumstances behind this as far as your research?
I think Vincent Bugliosi came in to shitcoat the operation. He has a lot of sex cult activities in his life. If you look at his personal activities in life, the LA prosecutor who prosecuted that case. In work of Ed Sanders, he was their contemporary at the time. He documents the process connections of Charles Manson. So the process, in my assertion, is a joint MI6 CIA operation. For example, Robert de Grimston's folks, British intelligence, his associate Timothy Wiley's folks, British intelligence. Timothy Wiley's wife is the daughter of a hereditary member of that secret society that started America. It's a modern-day knighthood, the Society of Cincinnati. They passed down membership from the original members through the paternal bloodline. A man by the name of, this is his nickname, Satan, wasn't his birth name, Satan Astor, as in the Astor family, Drayton. He was a descendant of Colonel Drayton from the South Carolina chapter of the Society of Cincinnati. His daughter marries Timothy Wiley. Well, that's strange. That's not the only kind of secret society deep connection we have in that environment. Now, it is interesting, though. Satan Astor, Drayton's first cousin Astor, was the financier of the Church of Satan, and that's admitted by Blanche Barton, Anton LaVey's second wife, in her book.
Wow.
So we see that connectivity there, right? We see a lot of that connectivity, the intelligence, the secret society that started America. So that secret society has been experiencing a factional divide since its inception. It first permeated to the surface of American, public purview in the matter of Aaron Burr, member of the New York chapter of the Society of Cincinnati, murdering the president general of the society, the leader, Alexander Hamilton.
What was it about the period of time where we had many serial killers popping up at the same time, the 70s and 80s? I wonder if it's after the MK Ultra initial experimentation where we start to actually implement some of the things that they were learning and test it out on the public, because we had a period of a couple of decades where serial killers were a big thing and it started to kind of die out. We don't hear too much about it anymore, even if they are still occurring.
No, you're spot on, sir. They are still occurring. We don't hear about as much anymore because, like I was saying, with the evolution of the smiley face killings, it's the evolution of these programs, like on a more of a strategic level perspective. Again, if anyone listens to Operation GCD, you're going to hear me say Dave McGowan is right over and over again. For example, I took all of the salient characteristics from his Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon book and applied that to the grunge rock and roll countercultural scene. Not only does it involve the same fucking characters, it's the same mode of operation. So Dave McGowan was right, and he asserts a program to kill. Spree shooters became serial killers that became school shooters. So we see these evolutions, and again, he was right. We see that continued pattern of behavior today, the evolution of these activities.
You mentioned the grunge era. Oftentimes, we just hear about the hippie movement, some of the early rock and roll artists that were involved with intelligence. I haven't heard much about artists in the grunge era being part of culture creation operations. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. What was, have you read Weird Scenes?
Yeah.
I'm presuming you're familiar with that. What was some of your takeaways of some of the key salient characteristics that you took away from that? And I'll respond with how that applies to the grunge scene.
As far as the intelligence operation, I think it was causing not only division but demonizing the hippie movement, so it seemed dangerous to the public. Also, they were introducing a lot of the drug culture, so they'd be able to find out how it would psychologically affect the public and then further be able to manipulate based on the effects of the drugs and the reaction to the movements and the division going through that time.
I agree with you, Chris. You're spot on, sir. So you need a marketing campaign. You need a marketing apparatus in which to institute this drug business into the culture. And that's what we see with the hippie movement. We see these as McGowan points out, prior to the onset of the hippie movement, which is exclusively, an intelligence operation involving the sons and daughters of the military industrial and spook complex. Same business that applies in Seattle grunge. In fact, the Wrecking Crew who recorded a lot of that music for the Laurel Canyon scene, well, one of the daughters of the Wrecking Crew did a lot of the same stuff in the grunge scene for the studio musicians. So we have that. We have the marketing campaign through Hollywood. Peter Fonda and Easy Rider was one of the pinnacle of this Hollywood aspect of the Laurel Canyon scene. We have his daughter doing the same thing with the film Singles in the grunge scene, which literally stars the grunge acts like Pearl Jam.
Wow.
So, and again, it fits the same mold as the sons and daughters of the military industrial complex. For example, the Alice in Chains song Rooster, Jerry Kent was based upon Jerry Cantrell's father, who was timed in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne out of Fort Campbell. He joined the Army, went to basic training, and went to the 101st alongside Jimi Hendrix. Rooster, that is.
That's pretty obvious that modern rap music has been weaponized in a sense to divide and cause culture and morality to degrade at a rapid pace. But would you say it's the same for every genre of music, including some of the new pop music and nonsense that's coming out now?
Oh, dude, 100%, dude, 100%. So actually, I have a master's degree in administration and criminal justice because, like I said, I spent 21 years in the Air Force military police, and was my intent to kind of, at the time, 15 years ago, I was focused on matters such as that, educating myself in those regards. And I actually did a project in my master's program where I mapped out the early onset of gangster rap and the Whack and Hunt private prison system. And the two graphs they go like this together. You know what I mean? So it's when you start back, I'm a very visual person. When I start putting these things, I map things out. I make graphs. I put on spreadsheets just so I can understand things. And it's a very clear image.
Going back to serial killers briefly, there's some that speculate even Jeffrey Dahmer may have been involved with some kind of intelligence, or at the least part of a MK Ultra program. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, Dave McGowan is right. So how does a 17-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer on a senior class trip to Washington, D.C. call the vice president and say, "Hey, vice president, I'm not the vice president. hey, Vice President, my high school class, I'm going to come visit you in your office. Is that cool? And they're like, yeah, come on down there, Jeff. Now, on that note, also, that's, I mean, if anyone can provide any, I've never found any kind of context to make that make sense. Dave McGowan's right. Uh, would you believe that one of John Wayne Gacy's victims and Jeffrey Dahmer's victims were abducted from the same gay club in Milwaukee?
Oh, really?
Would you believe that one of the victims of John Wayne Gacy was abducted from a 16-year-old boy was abducted from a bus station? He was the stepbrother of Paul Bonacci of the Franklin scandal issues. All of these Muppets know each other.
Wow.
And his mother and father, both Society of the Cincinnati families. Just saying.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
The victim's mother, Paul Bonacci's mother, and his stepfather, the Andersons are one of the most prominent Society of Cincinnati families. Paul Bonacci's stepfather and his stepbrother were, because again, that was his stepbrother from his stepfather. That young man was victimized by that 16-year-old boy. Anderson was victimized by John Wayne Gacy from a bus station in Chicago. Well, I assert he may have been the next hereditary member in that bloodline of the Society of Cincinnati. So it seems like Paul Bonacci's stepfather was a hereditary member. There's a lot of hereditary members that you know the name of. We just don't know the context, right? Mm-hmm. And we can get into that later, where you can give me any. I argue all conspiracy culture and high weirdness in American parapolitics all roads lead back to the society, and I'll let you give me any example, and I'll bring that home for you. We can do that later here, but yeah, in regards to that, I think one of these factors in these murders, even the serial killers, is eliminating the competition, right? So, for example, Sharon Tate, back to the Manson murders on August 8th of 1969, her father, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tate, U.S. Army Intelligence. His third great grandfather, a Lieutenant Jesse Tate of the Virginia chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati. The young 8.5 unborn baby in Sharon Tate's belly was in all likely probability, the next hereditary member in that bloodline for Paul Tate, who is since deceased and has never passed on his membership and bloodline. He has no male descendants, not even through his daughter's kids, right? So in that regard, I think some of it is eliminating the competition in the secret society warfare.
You just mentioned that most of the insanity, high-impact events, conspiracies can be traced back to the Society of Cincinnati. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
100%. Absolutely, sir. September 27, 1969, brought back to Edward Wynne Edwards, Lake Berryessa, the man behind the mask of the Zodiac killings. Again, by that point in time, Ed and Charlie knew each other for 17 years. They met at the Chillicothe Reformatory, a place I argue, and there seems to be documentation, MK Ultra programs existed at. So in 52, Ed shows up. 6 months later, Charlie Manson shows up. Ed departs there 12 months later for a different institution, and then in comes Otis Toole, right? So, and then 10 years after that at the Chillicothe Reformatory, you get a man by the name of Thomas Eugene Creech, who's now sitting on death row. They've attempted to execute him numerous times in Idaho and failed. Thomas Eugene Creech was an early member of the Church of Satan by Michael Aquino's own admittance in his own autobiography in 1969 at the Black House in San Francisco. And then he went on a murder spree and robbery spree in the Pacific Northwest. He did a murder and robbery spree in 69, the same murder and robbery, same pattern of behavior as Edward Wynne Edwards 10 years prior. And lo and behold, they come from the same place, Chillicothe Reformatory, down to the point where Ed in 1959 marries a 17-year-old girl in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And in 1969, Thomas Eugene Creech marries a 17-year-old girl in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Now, I don't have the evidence that Thomas Eugene Creech had some Operation Chaos CIA credentials, but I have that evidence for Ed. Ed was issued credentials under the name of Dr. James Garfield Langley. These Muppets at Langley are not very creative, are they? James Garfield like the president and Langley like their headquarters. He was arrested numerous times with those credentials. How did he keep getting them reissued? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying any of those characters in Society of Cincinnati. I'm saying they employ a team of assassins, a hand of death cult style operation to do their biddings of these secret societies. And Brian Hartnell, who died in the Zodiac killing, or who survived the Zodiac killings, my apologies, in Lake Berryessa, his mother was a walker. She Her father was Walker. His second great-grandfather was Colonel Benjamin Walker of the New York chapter of the Society of Cincinnati, a personal friend of George Washington. And I argue that since Brian Hartnell's grandfather had no sons, and the only son that his daughter had was Brian, well, Brian Hartnell's alive today, and I argue he's the hereditary member of the Society of Cincinnati.
Last few minutes, let's tie all this together with the Satanic Panic era. I'm pretty sure that it has connections with everything we've discussed tonight. I grew up in the 80s, and I remember hearing all about it. I remember some of the hysteria from family members about it. But what can we look at that is some of the most important aspects that most people will never hear about?
So everyone says, that's a great question. So one of the salient characteristics that I've been unpacking is, again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm taking folks who've done some objective journalism and research in the past, such as Dave McGowan, and then evolving their theories, seeing what pans out, seeing what doesn't. And again, time and time again, many of these, Maury Terry was correct, Dave McGowan was correct, Ed Sanders was correct. I've gotten my hands on the Terry files. I've been to the archives at Princeton to review and copy all of the Ed Sanders files. They were right. They were right. There's a lot of stuff that was never made public, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff. I know there's a lot of stuff in the Terry files being restricted from public purview today. Back to that Josh Seaman character and his interactions with some of those projects. Not to get too far off base, but I'd say one of the biggest things is the McMartin preschool situation. Now, Ted Gunderson, or Laser Tag Ted as I call him, he did a speech where he claimed he got shot by 2 lasers. I like to roast him about these things. He's an ardent violator of constitutional rights. He used to run COINTELPRO. Why do we believe this man? It's first and foremost. Secondly, he had nothing to do with the McMartin preschool tunnels that he's often credited with. In fact, he infiltrated one of the victims of that McMartin preschool, one of the SRA victims' mothers. He infiltrated her life and lived on her couch. A woman by the name of Jackie McGauley. Folks can check that out. She had never had anything nice to say about Ted. She hired the UCLA archaeological team, she and 2 other parents, to go onto that site and dig. Ted, on the same day, the archaeological team that the lady's house that he'd infiltrated for years, they sent out the archaeological team. Ted takes other parents from the preschool out there with shovels and calls the LA Times. That's Ted Gunderson. And Jackie McGauley would say that for those almost 3 years that he lived on her couch, he spoke with Colonel Michael Aquino every night. This is the same time that Ted Gunderson and Michael Aquino were on the primetime Geraldo Satanic Panic TV special in 1987, acting like their enemies.
Didn't the guy that wrote the psych warfare manual with Aquino, doesn't he run Turning Point or involved highly with Turning Point?
Yes, sir. Well, that's a great point. Paul Valle, Major General retired Paul Valle, he is on the advisory council. I used to do some work in my private detective agency. I was hired by the group of people that built Turning Point USA out of Chicago, this group of what they describe themselves as ranked, upper echelon Republican folks, including at the time the RNC finance chair. These are the people behind Turning Point USA. They're a dark bunch. They tried to kill me when we had a falling out. They had hired me as to do open source intel reports. Then after about 6 months, they started adamantly insisting that I was going to be running for U.S. Senator for Ohio. This is 1 year prior to anyone hearing the name J.D. Vance, my cousin there. Never met the man. He is my kinfolk. But these are the same people those are his political backers, right? So yes, Paul Valle is on that advisory council, but there's a much darker bunch at the heart of that entire operation. And they may be part and parcel to one another. I'm just saying, that's a dark group.
Everything that's unfolding right now, many would just boil it down to essentially global domination, AI governance, have most people living herded into smart cities, social credit system. Most people would think that is the ultimate end goal. I do believe that there is a spiritual layer as well. This is where all the occult practices come in that most people refuse to look at because it goes too far outside of their paradigm. But in your perspective, what are some of the most important aspects of what is unfolding globally?
I think you're spot on, Chris. That's how I break it down. It's a battle. We're entering an age of battle versus good and evil. In a Greek apocalyptic sense, where everything that is possibly known will come to the surface and be known. That is the ancient Greek apocalypse, right? And in that apocalyptic times we're living in, and that's the sense of the term apocalypse. I don't mean it in the end of the world sense. It's the end of some folks' worlds, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But not the end of the world like shit's blowing up, right? Not in that sense. More of a metaphorical sense, not a literal sense. But yeah, it's about good and evil. Good and evil is boiling to the surface. Folks are taking sides. I don't look at things as left and right. I've never voted.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So, I think politics is fake and gay. I've always thought it's fake and gay. And voting has never mattered. It didn't matter in 1803. It didn't matter in the Great Compromise of 1877. It didn't matter in the hanging chat of 2000, and so on and so forth.
Now, putting aside what is being portrayed in the media about the division, the state of society, everything is horrible. With your interactions with your normal people, with the people you talk to on this show, with your everyday communication, do you see that there is hope? Do you see that more people are checking out of those divisive paradigms and starting to become aware?
I think so. I really do. I think a lot of folks are starting to sense again. I think you can look at a lot of things like the shutdown of 2020. You know, a gun can be used for defense and for offensive actions, right? So anything can be both good and bad. You know what I mean? And it can both yield positive and negative results. And quite honestly, a lot of times folks get stuck in their own paradigms and refuse to get out. So you need a life altering event in which to cause folks to start noticing. And I think folks have started noticing. We're seeing that now with all these frauds. Mm-hmm. I focused my private detective agency on investigating a number of frauds. I got myself into a lot of trouble doing so. These extensive frauds we're seeing popping off, not just in Columbus, Ohio, which I'm very familiar with these activities, and have fought and made enemies amongst the political class of Ohio and the state level in regards to a lot of these matters over the years. They attempted to prosecute me. I'm a fucking Boy Scout, sir. Folks say they can indict a ham sandwich. I had a county prosecutor in Ohio open up an unlawful grand jury against me for 2 weeks. They found nothing. Yeah. So I think folks starting to notice. You know, whether it's Texas, California, Maine, Massachusetts, folks starting to notice. I think it's a positive sign.
On. Any final thoughts? And also, once again, let the audience know how they can get a hold of all your content.
Chris, I greatly appreciate the conversation. I'm going to have you on as a guest on my show here in the future. We'll get in contact. I do a weekly Fridays roundtable discussion on all matters high weirdness and conspiracy culture, usually based upon the interests of the guests. But yeah, I try to just make it a free-flowing, relaxed conversation, not necessarily an agenda or slides or anything like a presentation. Although I do those things, I take a concerted effort to educate and entertain, and I make sure I provide my resources. And if folks want to tell me I'm wrong, great. I'm happy to have that conversation, but I do provide the evidence in which supporting the claims I make. And I do so in Operation GCD Sundays, which is my kind of my life interactions with different incidents of high weirdness and conspiracy culture, whether it's Edwin Edwards, whether it's Nathaniel Bart Jonah, a serial killer from Great Falls, Montana, my new / return hometown, who may or may not have fed me a human meat burger back in the summer of 2000. Oh. And I came face to face with in the Cascade County Jail in 2001. I can assure you, sir, that man was pure evil. He was a ardent kid diddler, cannibalistic, homicidal, psychopathic serial killer who was unleashed on the small town of Great Falls, Montana back in 1994. Whoa. So I discuss those and stuff like that on my Sundays. Wednesdays, I do Operation GCD Live. That's Patreon. GCD Live Wednesdays is my occult and or esoteric film reviews. Where do these ideas come in our culture? How do they permeate? What are being told to us through our quote unquote entertainment? I unpack all those things. Fridays again is my roundtable. That's another free show I do. But then Operation GCD Thursdays is live. Thursdays is my anatomy of a satanic panic.
Awesome, man. I love it. Keep on doing what you're doing. We'll definitely have to do this again. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description. If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history.